5,000 years ago, Europe had millions of farmers. Then almost all of them vanished. By 4000 BCE, Neolithic farmers had transformed the continent. From the Balkans to Britain, from Iberia to Scandinavia, their descendants had been farming for 2,000 years. They had cleared the ancient forests, drained wetlands, and built the first permanent villages Europe had ever known. They built some of the earliest permanent settlements in human history. Some of their towns held thousands of people, larger than anything that would exist in Europe for millennia. They traded polished stone axes across hundreds of kilometers, from alpine quarries to the coasts of Britain. Their agricultural revolution had fed a population explosion that filled every habitable valley on the continent. Then, in the space of a few centuries, their genetic signature nearly disappeared. DNA from hundreds of ancient skeletons across Europe tells the same story. Between roughly 3300 and 2500 BCE, the genetic makeup of the continent was overwritten. And the question that haunts every geneticist who has studied this event is simple. The word replacement appears in study after study, but what does it actually mean? It means that the people who lived in a place were genetically different from those who came after. The ancestors vanished. New lineages took their place. How do you replace 90% of a continent's population in a few hundred years? In 2015, a landmark study led by Wolfgang Hawk sequenced 69 ancient European genomes. The results revealed that a population from the Pontic-Caspian steppe had migrated into Central Europe on a massive scale. Archaeologists call them the Yamnaya. They emerged around 3300 BCE on the grasslands north of the Black Sea. They were semi-nomadic pastoralists. They herded cattle, rode horses, and lived in wagons. Horse riding gave them a decisive advantage in mobility over the sedentary farming communities. DNA tells us they had brown eyes, dark hair, and intermediate skin color. None had the blue eyes or blonde hair that many people associate with ancient Europeans. Those traits appeared later, after mixing with local populations. They were the first Europeans known to regularly ride horses and to use wheeled vehicles. Wagon burials found beneath kurgans show that mobility was central to their identity. They buried their dead in individual pits beneath earth mounds called kurgans. And then they moved west. And everything changed. Around 2900 BCE, Yamnaya descended groups began appearing in Central European archaeological sites. They moved through the Danube corridor, spreading rapidly across the continent. Within 500 years, their genetic signature dominated the continent from the Atlantic coast to the Urals. In Central Europe, they became the corded ware culture. In Western Europe, they merged into the bell beaker complex. Wherever they settled, the genetic data tells the same story. The local population didn't just shrink. It was almost completely replaced. The male lineages were devastated. Before 3000 BCE, European Y chromosome lineages were diverse. After 2500 BCE, two-step-derived haplogroups dominated everywhere. The loss of Y chromosome diversity was catastrophic. It is one of the most severe genetic bottlenecks in recorded human prehistory. A dozen major lineages reduced to 2D, one of the most severe genetic bottlenecks in human history. And the replacement was sex-biased. Stepmen married local women. Mitochondrial DNA shows that many local female lineages survived the transition, but the Y chromosomes of the Neolithic men were almost entirely erased. The scale of what was lost is difficult to comprehend. Before the steppe migration, Europe's most advanced civilization was the Cucuteni Tripelia culture in modern-day Romania and Ukraine. Their megasites held up to 15,000 people, larger than any contemporary settlement in Mesopotamia. They produced some of the most sophisticated painted pottery in the ancient world. Some of their settlements covered over 300 hectares. They were the largest communities anywhere on Earth. They had specialized craftspeople, long-distance trade networks, and a sophisticated artistic tradition. And then around 3200 BCE, they vanished from the archaeological record almost completely. Entire cities were burned and abandoned. The population simply disappeared. Archaeological evidence shows that many Cucuteni Tripelia settlements were deliberately burned, around 3200 BCE. Some scholars argue the burning was ritual. Others believe it was destruction. What is not debated is that after the burning, steppe ancestry appears in the region for the first time. But was it invasion? Was it disease? Or was it something else entirely? This is where the story gets complicated, because the DNA cannot tell us why. The most common assumption is military conquest. Horse riding warriors overwhelming sedentary farmers. The Yamnaya did have horses, copper weapons, and wheeled wagons, all military advantages. But there is almost no archaeological evidence of large-scale warfare during this transition. No mass graves, no fortified battlefields, no skeletal trauma consistent with organized violence. Forensic analysis of hundreds of skeletons from this period shows normal mortality patterns. Whatever caused the replacement, it was not a conventional war. Something else drove the most dramatic genetic transformation in European prehistory. If this was a genocide, it left no bodies. The Neolithic dead from this period looked like they died of ordinary natural causes. No evidence of mass violence anywhere. There are no arrow wounds, no blade cuts on the bones, no signs of defensive injuries. Which brings us to the second hypothesis, plague. In 2018, researchers found plague DNA in skeletons that predate the steppe migration. Ancient strains of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague, were found in Neolithic skeletons across Europe. The strains were ancient, predating the medieval Black Death by 4,000 years, but they were real and they were lethal. The plague may have swept through the dense Neolithic farming communities, devastating populations that lived in close quarters with livestock and each other. Dense settlements with no sanitation, domesticated animals carrying zoonotic pathogens. Trade routes connecting thousands of communities meant a pathogen could cross the continent in a generation. The steppe herders may not have conquered anyone. They may have simply walked into empty land. The Yamnaya may not have conquered anyone. They may have simply migrated into a continent already emptied by disease. But the plague hypothesis has its own problems. The ancient plague strains lacked key genes for flea-borne transmission. Without those genes, the plague could not spread as efficiently as the medieval Black Death. It could kill individuals. But could it depopulate a continent? Some researchers argue the answer lies in a third explanation: demographic collapse. Pollen records from across Europe show a sharp decline in agricultural activity around 3000 BCE. Forests reclaimed former farmland. Fields went fallow, settlements shrank or were abandoned. Climate data suggests a cooling and drying event around this time. For farming communities that depended on predictable rainfall, even a modest climate shift could be catastrophic. Crop failures, famine, disease, and population decline, all happening at once. The Neolithic farmers may have been in demographic freefall before the steppe migrants ever arrived. Their population may have dropped by half or more before a single Yamnaya wagon crossed the Danube. But the most important evidence comes from the places where the pattern was different. Iberia tells a completely different story from the rest of Europe. In 2019, a massive study of Iberian ancient DNA showed that steppe ancestry arrived late and gradually, unlike Central Europe, where the replacement happened within centuries. In Iberia, the genetic transition took over 1,000 years. Local Copper Age cultures in Iberia persisted for centuries alongside the incoming steppe ancestry. The Iberian pattern proves that replacement was not inevitable or instantaneous. The two populations coexisted and gradually merged over many generations, but the Y chromosome pattern was identical. Even in Iberia, the local male lineages were eventually almost completely replaced. The 2024 study on the El Argar culture in southeastern Spain confirmed complete Y chromosome replacement by the Bronze Age. The Copper Age male lineages of Iberia were gone. Every single one. Different timelines, different mechanisms, but always the same genetic outcome. Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Britain, Iberia, Scandinavia. The steppe male lineages won everywhere. The mechanism varied. The result was always the same. So what actually drove this pattern? The honest answer is that we still do not know. It was probably not one thing. It was probably everything at once. Plague weakened the densely packed farming communities. Climate stress reduced food production across the continent. Demographic collapse created empty territory. And the steppe herders, mobile and resilient, filled the vacuum. They had advantages the farmers did not: mobility, horses, dairy pastoralism that did not depend on fixed fields. When the crops failed, the herders survived. When the plague struck the towns, the nomads dispersed. And the sex bias pattern suggests something else. Steppe men who married local women had more surviving children. Mathematical models show that even a small reproductive advantage, sustained over 10 to 15 generations, could produce the patterns we see in the DNA. No swords needed. Just more surviving children, generation after generation after generation. The archaeological record shows exactly this kind of gradual integration across dozens of sites. Not a single battle, not a single massacre, just centuries of differential survival. But here is what this means for the idea of European identity. Modern Europeans are a mixture of three ancient ancestral populations that never coexisted, and each one replaced the one before it. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, the original Europeans, were replaced by Neolithic farmers who migrated from Anatolia. Neolithic farmers were then almost entirely replaced by steppe pastoralists from the east. No European population has ever been permanent. The continent has been genetically rewritten at least twice in the last 10,000 years. The continent has been genetically rewritten at least twice. And every person walking the streets of Europe today carries the genetic legacy of all three populations inside them. Hunter-gatherer, farmer, and herder. Three peoples separated by thousands of years of history who never knew each other existed, now permanently united in every modern European genome. The people who built the first farms and the first cities of Europe are largely gone. They share almost no paternal DNA with the people who live there today. Europe's genetic history is not continuity. It is repeated replacement. And the people who call themselves European today are the descendants of the last group to arrive. The question is not whether it happened. It is whether the pattern has truly ended. New skeletons are being sequenced every year. New studies are rewriting the timeline. Each genome adds another data point to a story that grows more complex with every discovery. And every bone that comes out of European soil has the potential to change the story once more. The DNA never lies, but after 5,000 years of silence, it has only just begun to speak.